Hi, Wendy.
Hey Amanda,
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. I'm good. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, joining us for Coffee Talk Moms. Today, we have Professor Aswad Walker. He is a pastor at Shrine Christian Center of Houston, your progressive educator, counselor, and writer. Thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So in your own words, tell us about yourself.
Okay, well, associate pastor of the Shrine Christian Center of Houston. Other folk know us as the Shrine of Black Madonna. I've been teaching African American Studies at U of H since forever, 2004. The associate director of the Urban Research and Resource Center at Texas Southern University, and writer, editor, photographer for the Defender Network. The Defender being a Black newspaper here in Houston, moving into our 90th year of existence. So that's pretty much it.
That is incredible. Well, thank you for being here. So we just wanted to get right into it. Wanted to talk to you about everything that's been going on.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that George Floyd was the straw that broke the camel's back. I know that there's been hundreds of other cases of police brutality over the years. And we're wondering, why do you think that the killing of George Floyd has led to this wave of protests that have gone even beyond the US? And why did it happen now and not before?
I think for a few reasons. Number one, with the coronavirus pandemic, everyone is at home with our televisions, our viewing devices in front of our faces. And so it was harder for us to ignore what we saw. And then the second thing is literally what we saw. We saw a person lynched right in front of our eyes. And one of the things that struck a chord, I know, with Black women, Black moms, and I would dare say all moms, is when George Floyd was down with the officer's knee pressed in his neck, and he started calling for his mother, his mother who passed away. And that just really broke a lot of people down.
For me.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and on top of that, just to see the look of nonchalance on the face of the officer with his hand in his pocket, as if he knows there's absolutely no repercussions for the actions that he was taking. I think all those things combined, plus, this was on the heels of Ahmaud Arbery being chased down, gunned down in Georgia. My timeline is correct. Breonna Taylor had also been killed just recently, just before George Floyd. And so it was just one on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of 400 years, seemingly, of this same mistreatment. And, it's amazing because Black and brown people, we've been saying this forever, but with people at home and unable to turn their eyes away, I think that's really what pushed it over the hump, so to speak.
Yes, I agree. That was definitely, all eyes were on the situation and the cops, and we saw, huge protests all over the US. How are these different than protests in the past? A big one was in 1992 with the Rodney King verdict. Did you, notice anything that was different in the ones that took place 2020?
Yeah, these more recent protests have struck a chord with people of all races, ethnicities, religious backgrounds, sexual orientations, and geographies. And so I think that is one of the biggest differences. But I would argue there's another huge difference that no one is really talking about, and that is, I'm reading a book, Lord have mercy, I forgot the name of it, but it's by Dr. Benjamin Talton, and it's about the life of the late Congressman Mickey Leland, who's from here in Houston, legendary for his social action work, not only locally but globally. And in the book, Dr. Talton talks about Mickey Leland being a part of the grassroots tradition and taking that tradition into the halls of Congress. And so for them, a protest was just one aspect of what they were trying to do. But before they actually had the protest, they had small group classes where they were educating people about the issue. They sat down with legislators to talk about different policies and laws to craft. They had conversations with the Black press and whatever other members of the press that they could get their ear, so that they would have a vehicle to get their message out to the people. So the protest was just one aspect of their whole movement. They had a whole gamut, a whole playbook of things that they worked, so that it wasn't just going to be, let's go out here and expend this energy and not expect anything to happen. They had a before the game, during the game, and after the game program that I think we could really learn from and use right now. So to me, that's the biggest difference.
That's really interesting. And I think too with social media as well, now it's this, that was able to spread as well with the young people and gain a lot. Can you help us understand how the civil rights played out in the government?
How the civil rights movement played out in the government. Well, one way it played out was the government was a very active agent in trying to squash the civil rights movement. Though President Lyndon Baines Johnson did play a major role in getting major legislation pushed, I'm literally sacrificing his own political career to do so. So on that level, how it played out in the government was we had a friend in the White House, so to speak. But on so many other levels, the government was an active agent in trying to squash the movement. The Federal Bureau of Investigation that was run at that time by J. Edgar Hoover, he instituted a program called the Counterintelligence Program, better known as COINTELPRO, and their whole purpose was to monitor, spy on, instigate, undermine progressive organizations that they deemed a threat to the American way of life. So they monitored the women's rights movement. They monitored the Chicano liberation movement, the anti-war movement. But their main focus was the civil rights and the Black Power movements. So for one example, out in California, where you're from, there's the Black Panther Party, and then there's an organization called US, led by Dr. Maulana Karenga. Both of them are progressive organizations wanting a better reality for Black people. Well, COINTELPRO would write letters stating that they're writing this letter from the Black Panthers and send it to us. But it was an incendiary letter, threatening them and calling them out of their names. And then COINTELPRO would do the exact same thing, saying this letter is from us, sending it to the Black Panther Party. And so that grew a beef between the two organizations that should have been working together. In fact, there was literal bloodshed because of that. But they, the tapes of Malcolm X, the tapes of Dr. Martin Luther King, all that is COINTELPRO. They were trying to undercut and squash the movement, but it even was more nefarious than that. Bobby Hutton, who was a 17-year-old member of the Black Panther Party, was killed in Oakland, California. Fred Hampton, who was, I believe, 19 or 20 years old when he was killed, he was the head of the Black Panther Party in Chicago. Both of them dynamic leaders, probably Fred Hampton even more so. But the point is, COINTELPRO would work with local police agencies to do their work. And so really the assassination of Fred Hampton, you could argue and make a real strong case that it was orchestrated, organized by COINTELPRO. And it wasn't until that activity was discovered that at least they said they were going to stop doing those types of activities. But that's how the civil rights movement played out in the government. So you had the people, and you had well-meaning people from all over the country of all races coming together trying to do something positive for Black people. But it's so disheartening to think that the government, to whom we all pay our tax dollars to, took such an active role in trying to suppress the rights of so many of its own citizens. So I wish I had a cheerier answer to give you, but that's what it is.
Well, that's a good segue into my question that I have for you, Professor Walker, is how does the redlining affect the Black wealth?
So there's an excellent book that can shed way more light than I can. It's called The Color of Law. And it talks about redlining. And also, for those who may be interested, Ta-Nehisi Coates, award-winning author, thought leader, he won a major award for an article that he wrote for the Atlantic magazine. The name of the article was The Case for Reparations. That article and the book I mentioned, The Color of Law, both talk about the impact of redlining. And so essentially what redlining is you just draw a red line around Black neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods are devalued, so the property is devalued. Now what that does is, if you have a house and it may be equal to any house in any other community in that particular city, but because it's in the red-lined area, the value of that house is lowered. And so over time, the owners of that home, the folk that live in that home, they can accrue less wealth than a person that has a house really of equal value, but just placed in another community. So because of redlining, Black people were not allowed to build as much wealth. But Ta-Nehisi Coates' article goes into even more detail, and it talks about how in those so black family had the means, able to live wherever they could afford to buy. They were not allowed to do so because realtors would only sell to Blacks in those redlined areas. And it's important to note, and The Color of Law makes this point, that this wasn't done by just some bad actors, like some realtors who were racist or bigoted. These were policies from the federal government. Policies from the federal government that said, we will give you, developer, money to build these suburbs, but a part of a stipulation is you cannot, by law, sell to Black people. And then so if someone living there wants to then sell their house and move somewhere else, they, by law, could not sell that home to a Black person. It was written into the deeds.
Wow.
And so even if Black people had the means, had the wherewithal to live in certain places, weren't allowed to, the amount of wealth that they were able to accrue was greatly damaged. The amount of dollars generated to go into the public schools was lessened, so the schools didn't have the resources equal to the schools of other neighborhoods. And when the schools don't have the resources, they then don't have the same programs as other communities. And then what happens is Black families, Black mothers and fathers who want the best for their children, just like all parents want the best for their children, they're looking at the schools in their own neighborhood and they say, well, they don't have the programs that I want for my daughter, I want for my son. So then these parents start sending their children outside of their neighborhood to go to schools, which is great fine. I don't have an issue with that. But what then happens is you're taking these really talented young people and they're giving all their energy, juice, and fire to these schools over here, but it's weakening the school in the community. Mm-hmm. And so the programs aren't there, the resources aren't there, some of the top students aren't there, and thus when it's time to hire teachers, the best teachers don't want to go there. And so they end up going to the schools outside of those redlined communities. So it impacts, redlining impacts the Black community in so many ways. And I'll just say this, I know you have another question, but Black wealth lost via the impact of devaluing Black neighborhoods. So owner-occupied homes in Black neighborhoods are undervalued by an average of $48,000 per home. And we're talking about homes that are equal value, the people who live in the homes equal in terms of their wealth, their incomes, but $48,000 per home, which together adds up to $156 billion in cumulative losses for the Black community. Now think about what the Black community could do with that money. And it's amazing because people are so quick to say, well, look at what you're not doing, look at what you don't have, but they don't tell the underlying story of why it is like that. The real story is how blacks are doing so well in the midst of some of the things that have not some of the things that have happened, but some of the policies that have been laid down to allow such things to happen.
Wow, that's deep. So with that said, you were talking about how the redlining impacts the educational funding, right?
Mm-hmm.
The kids then travel across town to go to a better school to get the quality education, good after school programs, fine arts, etc. So the teachers that are in the schools within the community, which is what walking blocks away they can ride their bikes to, don't want those jobs. And then the school goes undone, right? And then it's unfunded. So how has education funding, how has that been such a systematic approach against the African American community? How would you say that?
Well,
how would you say that has happened?
I would say it's happened. One of the main drivers of that is the whole housing discrimination that we kind of briefly outlined, because that piece drives so much of it. When folk are looking for a home, what do they want? They want a home in a safe, nice neighborhood with great schools, maybe with parks and green space, and all the amenities. Well, if a community is devalued simply because of the color of the people's skin, it then almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the land is devalued. The services, city services, are often not as quick to, not as fast to do their jobs, and so it just becomes a spiral from there. And with the houses being devalued, the tax base, the tax dollars that are generated from those communities are far less. The schools in those particular areas, which means less resources, and on.
Yeah. So good point, Professor Walker. I wanted to do a follow-up question on, you were talking about the redlining and the wealth, and you mentioned that the devalue of a home in the African American community is about $48,000. So what happens when you have a community that's in the African American community, which we see it in Houston all the time? We can do Independence Heights as an example, right? The houses are devalued, and then now we have this big gentrification projects is going on in a house or land that was $6,000 or $60,000 is now almost $500,000 or $300,000 because you have a contractor that's coming in that wants to do all this gentrification to the area, these homes, etc. How is that so when one community has the area, it's devalued, and then all of a sudden triples the cost when a contractor comes in and comes up with a beautiful new plan, and it moves those taxpayers out of that community that they could once afford, right? And now they have to be moved to the suburbs, to an area where the houses are 3-4 times as much. And sometimes the house that they're in Independence Heights or 3rd Ward or 4th Ward or in the East End, they own this real estate. Now they have to start all over again. These seniors have to start all over again, deal with transportation issues, et cetera, et cetera. So why is that? I mean, I can go on about that, but why is it's devalued in one case, 48,000, and in another case, it's 4 or 5 times worth of value?
You really answered your own question, but I'll just say amen to what you said, and then I will just add that in these redline communities, and redlining has been outlawed, but it still happens. The insurance rate for businesses, like you want to run a business in these areas that are about to be gentrified, businesses are de-incentivized from opening stores there because they have to pay so much in insurance rates for perceived or real threats, crime, etc. But all that changes when the neighborhood changes, and that's why I say it's really like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's people's preconceived notions about what people bring to the table that then changes the dynamic. And so when a neighborhood is gentrified, then the insurance rates for businesses are way lowered. And so now you have all these businesses that are willing to come into the neighborhood, where the people that are living there are like, well, why didn't y'all come in before? And then the businesses that are there begin to change and start to offer holistic food and vegan offerings and so great things that everybody could benefit from. But where were these things before the neighborhood started to change. And so it's the insurance rates, it's the tax rates, but I think really what's driving this is our preconceived notions, conscious or subconscious, that some people's lives matter more than others. Some people are safer, nicer, others bring crime. And, you know, we're really talking about bigoted beliefs that were, like, for example, if y'all don't mind, one of the stereotypes about African Americans is that black people are lazy, which is crazy to me because I have 15 jobs and every black person I know has as many as I do or more. The black people that I've known for my 55 years have worked just as hard, if not harder, than any other human being on the planet. But the point I'm trying to make is this whole notion of black people being lazy, that was not even an idea in this country until black people were freed from enslavement. Before that, the ethos in this country was that black people were literally the hardest working, most innovative people, and not just because of enslavement, but the blacks who were free, the blacks who were enslaved yet able to contract their skills out from one plantation to the other. People saw this. Like I just finished reading this book that I would suggest to everybody, America's Unholy Ghosts. It's written by Joel Edward Goza, and he mentions, and also Dr. Carol Anderson in her book, White Rage, two excellent books. But Dr. Carol Anderson specifically, she talks about in reading the transcripts of the people of those times, you know, back in antebellum days, Northerners had a very negative opinion of white Southerners. Their opinion of specifically white Southern men, was that this was the laziest group of human beings in the country. There's one instance where they're talking about life now that slavery has ended, and this one Northerner asks this plantation owner, well, okay, why don't you and your sons go out there and pick the cotton or do whatever? No, are you insane? So in their minds, the people who had the lazy gene, so to speak, were the white landowners. But once blacks were freed from enslavement, then this idea that black people are lazy came about. And one of the reasons for that is because cities and municipalities wanted to re-enslave black people. They wanted to re-control black people. Even though slavery was abolished, they still wanted the benefits of slave labor. So if they could charge blacks with vagrancy or other made-up laws, they could then fill the jail houses with black people and then use their labor via the convict leasing program, convict leasing system that made individuals, businesses, and whole municipalities filthy rich off of free labor. And so this ethos of black people being lazy just fit the bill, and it just allowed for the re-enslavement of black people. So black people moved from being private property of one slave owner to public property or state property, working for the Alabama correctional facilities or the Texas penal system or whoever.
That's very intense. And yeah, I mean, that just, it's overwhelming. And yeah, when you said that black people had the stigma of being lazy, I don't know, it took my breath away, because if you look at history, it's just not the truth. And it's sorry, that just that got to me. I got a little choked up.
I'm with you.
Yeah. We've had many distractions with the kids and everything, so I appreciate your patience. One more quick question, we can conclude, but this is more on an individual level. We'd like to understand how names can cause biases and prejudices.
Yeah, so studies have been done, and I don't have the studies in front of me, but basically what they conclude is that if a person has a black sounding name, they are less likely to, like if they submit a resume, and on that resume, it's a name that sounds or reads Black, they are less likely to be called in for an interview. If they are interviewed and they have a Black sounding name, they are less likely to be hired on by that company. And it has nothing to do with ability. It has nothing to do with credentials. Multiple studies have been done where the people doing the studies sent in 2 resumes with equal credentials, and the person with persons with the Black sounding names were far less likely to be called in for an interview. And they further found that you could have a person with Black sounding names that has elevated credentials, better GPA, multiple postgraduate degrees, etc. But it's that stigma of having a Black sounding name. But it all goes back to this baggage of beliefs that our country has not garnered up the intestinal fortitude to have honest conversations. That's why I appreciate this this forum here for us to at least talk about it. You know, like I tell my class, I literally tell them, you know, if I don't care if everyone in here gets A's. I don't have to give a certain number of A's, B's, C's, whatever. I just want you, and I don't care if you agree with me or not, I just want you to wrestle with the information. I just want you to think about it. One thing I think we need to wrestle with as a country is there has been a declaration of Black inferiority that everybody believes, not just whites. Latinos believe it, Blacks believe it, Asians believe that Black people are just inherently inferior intellectually, etc. Blah, blah, blah. And the flip side of that coin is that there is this declaration of white superiority, and everyone believes that too: whites, Blacks, Asians, Latinos. And the crazy thing is, when people are allowed to just live and be and go to school with one another and have conversations like this with one another, we realize that we're all crazy, we're all smart, we're all brilliant. I mean, we bring all that to the table, right? I mean, we got jerks in all of races, and we got some really brilliant and loving people that come in all colors.
Yeah.
And the danger is when we come together. And I don't know if y'all have any more questions, but I'll just say this. One of the most dangerous moments in two of the most dangerous moments in American history were Bacon's Rebellion, and I'm sorry, y'all have to look it up, I don't remember the year, and when Dr. King started organizing his Poor People's March. The reason why both of those are so powerful, Bacon's Rebellion was enslaved Blacks partnering with dirt poor whites. They both realized they're both being used and kept out of the halls of power and not allowed to grow into their best selves. And so they worked together to change the system. And that rebellion was put down. It had to be put down because the idea of these poor whites recognizing that they had so much in common with these enslaved was dangerous to those few people who wielded all the power. And the same could be said for the Poor People's March. When Dr. King started talking about economics, he had just started talking about the war in Vietnam. Now he's talking about economics. When we talk about economics in the United States, even though the face of poverty is Black and brown, most poor people in the United States are white, and not just living in Appalachia. I'm talking about all across the country. And so when he's talking about a Poor People's March, he's talking about, man, we got to put aside all our differences, racial differences, our religious, denominational differences. We got to put all that aside because we really have more in common than not. And that's just a really dangerous notion for those people who profit from having both sides look at each other as the enemy. So we're fighting each other and not working to build a just world for everybody. But we can do it.
Yeah.
I feel like I've been given just a whole bunch of down information, but I mean, I'm such a hopeful brother, and
it kind of feels like I'm in class.
I see.
That was amazing. That was incredible.
It feels like I'm in
I see
class.
so much hope. I see so much hope, but we just have some work to do.
It's funny that you were talking about it's the Wilmington in North Carolina. I had that conversation today with one of my friends, and he sent me the video, and I haven't seen it yet, but he was saying this would change your life. And literally we had this conversation 10 o'clock today about the Wilmington in North Carolina, what you're talking about now. I think it was 1865.
That section of the country, I don't know what was in the water around North Carolina-ish and all that, because so many of the major revolts of the enslaved happened around there. I don't know what was going on over there, but something powerful was happening.
Yeah.
But you're exactly right.
So then just to conclude, I mean, that was very robust. How, if you can even answer this in a quick, I don't know, but how can the country move forward in overcoming the racial divide?
So I think we need to have the courage to face our past. Like in Germany, they sought to face their ugly past in terms of World War II and just the brutalization, extermination of European Jews. In South Africa, they had those what they call them, peace and reconciliation tribunals, where you had people from both races sharing their stories of living under the apartheid regime, giving them at least a venue to have those hard, difficult conversations. We've got to be able to do that, because once we can do that, we can then begin to see each other as human beings, and we can respectfully disagree. Like James Baldwin says, and I know I'm going to kill his words. He said, we can disagree and we can be respectful unless your disagreement with me is based on my subjugation. Then, we got issues. But as long as we can agree to disagree and hear each other, I think that is the big, if we took that step, all the other steps will take care of themselves.
Very powerful. Beautiful. No, go ahead.
No, I know we got to close, but it the people that in my own life experience and what I've read and seen, the people who are able to, the people who are most comfortable with their faith, whatever that may be, they are able to see God in anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They don't castigate people who have a different faith system or belief system. They don't just castigate them to hell. Whether they are Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, the folk who are most comfortable in their own belief system, in their own skin, they're able to look at anybody and they can see the divine, and they treat them out of that same kind of love and respect. I think there's far too many of us of all races who are not fully comfortable with our own religious homes, and so we become the most adamant about trying to damn everybody else.
Wow.
So, but I could go on and on. I'm sorry.
That's it.
We got to get out of here.
Sorry. No, that was truly beautiful. Thank you. And very hopeful. How can people learn more about you, or where can they find you? And we'll link everything.
Okay. Well, man, I'm on Facebook. I'm an open book. So just look up Aswad Walker, ASWAD Walker. Send me a friend request, and we can have all kinds of conversations. Or if you want to learn more about the shrine, about the church that I'm a part of, Shrines of the Black Madonna, shrines with an S, of the blackmadonna.org. And that tells more about our church. We have churches here, Atlanta, Detroit, South Carolina, and Liberia, West Africa. Or the University of Houston's African American Studies program. You can catch up with me there, or you can catch up with me at my 9-to-5, my real 9-to-5 at Texas Southern University, the Urban Research and Resource Center. The website
Job number 20.
Job number 20, exactly.
Because you can't be lazy with 20 jobs.
Oh no, that's what I'm trying to say, man. That's what I'm trying to say. urrc.tsu.edu. That's where you can learn more about that.
Perfect.
You can learn more about my books too. My wife is going to beat me up for I never publicize my books, but I have a few of those too.
You must. I'm sorry, my little guy. Well, thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for watching. Thank you. Please let us know what other topics you might like us to discuss next. And just bring them all here. You can go to www.coffeetalkmoms.com and subscribe and drop us a comment and let us know what you'd like to hear more of.
Bye for now.
Thank you.